Hello crafty friends, it's Jess from jesscrafts.com and today I'm here with a 10 cards 1 kit video. This is featuring the Simon Says stamp September card kit Best Birthday. I'm going to briefly show the supplies from the card kit, but if you are interested, the card kit is still available and all of the supplies are detailed on the Simon Says stamp website, which I'll link to. So there are these Jillibean soup tags that create shaker cards, the Doodlebug papers, the Simon Says stamp exclusive set Best Ever, and the Doodlebug sprinkles that are also exclusive to Simon Says stamp. I'm going to briefly show you the 6x6 pattern papers. What attracted me to this particular kit is the Doodlebug papers because I am a big fan of Doodlebug to begin with, and then they seem to combine them with some nice rainbow products. The exclusive sprinkles from Doodlebug as well are really cute. And then of course they do include the coordinating cardstock, and I know a lot of people use those to create their 10 card bases, but for me I prefer to use white cardstock for the card bases and then use that colored cardstock for other projects, as I can buy high quality white cardstock pretty easily. So here I am going to stamp the sentiment that I'll be using throughout most of it, which says sending lots of color your way. While there are a lot of great birthday elements in this particular card kit, these are not typically the kind of cards I'd create for a birthday. A lot of times when I'm working with the card kits and I'm making a couple of cards or I'm using a lot of pattern paper and product, I am making cards to send away for different organizations. I donate them to organizations like Cards for Hospitalized Kids, and so they don't request birthday cards specifically, so I try to make some more general things instead. And that's why I'll be using that sentiment throughout, but there are a lot of great birthday sentiments in this particular card kit and stamp set. I am stamping with Copic friendly ink. You can use the Simon Says stamp, the My Favorite Things, there's a Lawn Fawn Copic safe, and I'm going to create a pattern of this, what it will eventually be a rainbow heart. It kind of has the curve in it like the way a rainbow does, and I think that it's meant to be rainbow, but of course you could color it with any color scheme you want, and it just has the stripes. And I'm going to stamp them all along the side of the paper. Using a misti is making that really easy because I know that they're stamped in a row just because I'm sliding the paper up and down the misti. And I'm going to create another stamped card base here, and the reason I'm creating them both together because I'm going to color them the same way, so I'm going to pick out the Copics and use them on both cards. So I just wanted to have everything pre-stamped so that way I didn't have to keep bringing out markers or leaving them on my desk. So here I am stamping a different scene, with this time with the rainbow and the clouds from the stamp set. I want it to look like there are clouds at the end of the rainbow, but that is not the way the rainbow stamp comes, and I prefer that. But I stamped the two clouds and then I put a mask over them, and then I'm going to stamp the rainbow, and it's going to create a new look for the rainbow stamp. And I like that they let it have those options rather than forcing you to only have it one way by putting the clouds on it. This way you can have a cloud rainbow or a plain rainbow. And I'm going to go with the cloud rainbow, and I'm eventually going to add the cute little faces to these, but I want to add that at the end because I want to make sure they're nice and vibrant. Where I find when I stamp in Copic friendly ink and I color over it, it kind of dulls it a bit. So if there's a detail that I don't need to add to the end, I prefer not to. Even though the clouds are white, I'm going to add a little bit of a C marker to them. I believe it was C00, but any light gray marker will do. I have the C's and the W's. I prefer the C's for things that I want to, for inanimate objects generally, and for certain animals. But for clouds, I'm definitely more of a C than a W because I think the W, adding that warmer in, tends to make it more look like a storm cloud. So unless you're going for a storm cloud look, I recommend the C's. But I'm going to also color the rainbow. And to color the rainbow, I'm going to choose 2 colors for each of the rainbow colors, so like 2 reds, 2 oranges, 2 yellows. I'm not worried about being super precise with this. It's going to be a very simple coloring. I really just need it to be darker towards the clouds and lighter towards the top, just so it creates a little bit of interest and highlight. I thought you'd be able to see the marker caps based off where I was placing them, but it looks like about only half of them are showing up. So it doesn't really matter what colors you use, just pick two colors that are similar. I was using, for instance, Y18 and Y15. You can choose two colors that have the same beginning number when you're working with Copics, or two colors with the same ending number, and I think that they'll blend pretty well. If you have colors that are pretty far apart, like here I'm using two YG markers that are a little further apart, you could use the tip-to-tip technique and touch your light marker to the tip of your dark marker, and that will cause you to get a little bit better of a blending. And I'm going to use this same coloring technique to do the heart as well. So here I'm making the ends darker and then leaving the highlight in the center. I'm coloring the center last so that it doesn't get too dark. The more that you color over Copics, the darker they look. And I'm going to create a highlight in the center of the rainbow, but for the hearts, I'm going to alternate where the highlight is. Sometimes I'm going to have the highlight in the center of the heart so that it looks like the heart is sort of coming towards you in the center. And sometimes I'm going to add the highlight on the edges, which will then just kind of create a little bit of interest because there's a pattern of hearts on that card. But I didn't want to go through all that Copic coloring because this is a longer video trying to fit the 10 cards in. So here I'll use VersaFine ink to stamp the little faces onto the clouds, and I'm going to use a stitched rectangle die to cut it out. You'll see that I did some very similar coloring with those hearts. I alternated the highlight area as well as the pattern. And so some of them start with the red in the center and some start with purple in the center, and they just go in reverse rainbow order. And I'm going to put both of these on black cardstock. I really like the way that a lot of white space and a hint of black makes rainbow colors pop. So I'll probably use that pretty often in this particular series. And here, instead of cutting it with a stitched rectangle die, I instead just cut it so that there would be a little bit of black on each side. And here, now that I'm looking at it closely, it seems like I did generally put the highlights on the outside, but you could alternate them if you wanted. Sorry about that mix-up. Now I'm ready to work with the Jillibean tags. I only got 3 tags in my kit. You're supposed to get 4 tags and then 2 of the shaker pieces, so that was a little bit disappointing. I do think that Hero Arts is probably the better value kit overall, just because if you add up the cost of the stamps and dies and inks from their sets, it usually comes above the cost, where I think that Simon kits are a little bit closer in terms of the cost of the individual items is about the same as the cost of the kit. And so it's a little bit disappointing when you're missing something from the kit, even though, yeah, it's just a tag. Anyway, I decided to create some simple shakers. There is I took the Distress Oxide ink, and I like just a red one because I thought that it would coordinate well with the papers that I had. I inked it all over the front of the tag. Then I'm adding a little pattern paper behind it, and the kit did not come with any sequins, which I found a little surprising since it was clearly meant for there to be shaker cards, but I know that a lot of people have sequins, and so maybe that was kind of the thought process there, but I think, you know, a few sequins to fill up the shakers would have been a nice addition to the kit. I am, however, going to put one of the sprinkle stickers behind the shaker area so that it'll be encased by it and the shaker bits will shake around it, so the sequins will shake around it. And I initially thought about doing rainbow sequins, but this particular set of Doodlebug paper doesn't really have a lot of red in it. The red color in its rainbows are actually mostly pink. I will say that I really like the Jillibean Soup sprinkle shaker card, or shaker tags, what they're called, and shaped shakers, because they make making a shaker card really, really easy, but they are very thick. So I don't think that they would go through the mail very easily, in the sense that I don't think you could just put a single stamp on them. I think that you'd have to put extra stamps on them, and even still I'd be a little bit concerned because it pokes out so much. If it was handled roughly in the mail, you might crush the shaker there. So I probably should have added my adhesive before I put my shaker bits in because I'm kind of making them splatter all over the place, but you know, live and learn. And so you peel off the backer sheet and that causes it to stick to the tag, and then you peel off the backer sheet on the other side, and that would in theory stick it to your tag. However, that's only going to add adhesive around the shaker object. And so mine are jars and flowers. The kit originally shows balloons and hearts, but it seems that there was a substitution for some kits, so just kind of heads up on that in case you don't like the idea of a substitution. It does very clearly say that substitutions can be made, so I'm not upset by it. It's just that I want you to be aware if you aren't familiar with the kits. And then I'm going to stamp that same sentiment on top of everything once my shaker's assembled. So even though there is adhesive on those shaker bits, it doesn't completely seal the tag. It would only seal around the shaker. So I think adding some extra adhesive is a good idea, especially because, as I said, this might need a little bit more stability through the mail as it is quite puffy. And I'm just going to place that down on top of the rainbow paper. The rainbow paper matches the rainbow sticker inside, and those sequins are actually from a previous Simon Says stamp card kit, so I thought it would be good to use those up. Next, I am going to do another rainbow shaker card, but this time I'm going to color differently. Rather than just using Distress Oxide inks to color the background again, I wanted to experiment with something else. I'm not really loving what I did with this card. If I was going to do it again, and it's pretty tricky to do it again because you only get the shaker elements, right? You only get the shaker tags, and it's not a die, so therefore, you know, once you put it on, you're kind of stuck with it. You could trace this and cut out another one, but unfortunately, I think that, well, unfortunately, you only get the, you know, the one-off version of it. But I do think it would be interesting if they came out with a die that coordinated with their shaker. They're just calling them shakers, but like those plastic pieces. I think it would be cool if they had a die that was the same size as them, so that you could buy unlimited shakers and not have to buy the tags every time. You could then take them and pop them into cards or basically whatever you wanted, because you could cut that shape. And I'm not sure, I imagine there might be like proprietary reasons why they wouldn't want to do that, or maybe they do make them and I just don't know about it. But because I only got one shot at it, because they only, you know, those plastic bits only work with the tags, I kind of just had to be okay with what I did. I think that maybe adding a little bit more shading would have made this interesting, but basically I just colored on a rainbow pattern with Copics. And I thought, well, you know, Copics tend to blend out pretty well, so I thought that it would look a little bit smoother, but if I'm being honest, it kind of just looks like I colored it with Crayola markers. And maybe I haven't colored with Crayola in a while, and it does look a little better than that, but yeah, it just kind of looks like I colored on stripes with some regular old markers, and not my favorite. But I do think it's going to be fun and cheerful, and as with many of my other cards, I do donate these to organizations that serve children, so I have a feeling children are going to be a little bit more forgiving than I am, and they're not going to be like, gee, what a terrible card because you know, didn't add shading to your stripes. So anyway, just showing you again the process of making this shaker. If anyone's unfamiliar with it, this time I'm remembering to put my adhesive down before I put my shaker elements in, which is making life a lot easier. I'm going to pop that shaker bit in, and I'm remembering now that there is an adhesive on the front side. It's only on the back. I think it would have been kind of nice if it was on the front side too, to help make sure that it stays in there, unless I'm, you know, forgetting something, but I think that's just that one piece there that sticks it to the back. And it's probably like because you don't need the adhesive on the front, because if you seal down the rest of the tag, but I don't know, I think that would again might be a way to kind of guarantee things a little bit more on the front of your shaker. So that is my second shaker card. I'm pretty much just going to add it to the card base. I'm trying to go a little bit quicker with certain things because this is always a long video with the number of cards that I make. And I am working with that strip of hearts from the stamp set. I wanted to make some custom pattern paper with it. I thought that that would be a fun look and relatively easy to do. especially with a misti. So what I'm doing is I laid it onto my misti door, and I made sure that it was straight because the misti has a grid line that helps you to keep your stamp straight. Then I'm going to put the paper down and use the grid that's on the other part of the misti. So there's the grid on the door that helps you lay your stamp straight, and the grid on the mat, which helps you keep your paper straight. And also it helps me to move in between each stamping perfectly aligned. So I'm just moving up one square on the misti each time, and it's making the spaces between my rows of hearts even and perfect. And this is not something I would be able to do without the misti personally, even though you could use a grid mat to help you with it. I just think that the misti makes it infinitely easier. I'm using Distress Oxide inks. They're great for detail stamping, and they clean up really, really easily between colors. What I struggle with dye inks is when you're switching from a dark color to a light color, a lot of times you get bleeding in between, whereas with the Distress Oxide inks, I find that because they're reactive with water, you can clean them up really, really easy with whatever your typical stamping cleaning tool is. I use a Lawn Fawn stamp chamois, but I'm also using a dishcloth, as you can see there, to kind of dry it. As much as it cleans easily, you can get some water left behind, which then will make for not so smooth stamping. So you do not only want to wipe it down with a stamp chamois, you want to make it dry. So what I'm doing is stamp chamois followed by a dry dishcloth most of the time, and that's working well for me. I'm not getting any bleed in between them, and I'm able to switch colors really, really easily, have them all out on my desk. If I were working with dye inks, I might even need to use stamp cleaner in between when moving to a lighter color. And when you are trying to create a pattern like this with your misti, I recommend starting with your paper in the center of the misti and your stamp in the center of the misti, so you have as much room as possible to shift both up and down to fill as much of the paper as possible. This is of course easier to do in a regular size misti or an original size misti versus if you have the smaller mini misti, which doesn't give you as much room to move up and down. But you can do it because you can hang your cardstock outside of the misti by just a bit, and it will still stamp nicely. So once I had pretty much the whole thing done, I thought that it was originally going to be a card base, but it was kind of busy, and I decided instead to cut it down. And I will probably use this stamp set again in the future and maybe even recreate that look, but mix it up in some way that it doesn't come off as busy. And I'm sorry that this seems a little bit out of focus. I'm not sure if that'll look that way in the final video as well. But I'm going to cut that with a stitched oval die. And I know you can't see the stitching detail there, but that was. And then I'm going to layer it up with some of the pattern paper. I had decided that by the time I was done working with it for this particular video, I wanted to use up all the pattern paper. And as I got towards the end, I only had a bit of pattern paper left, but I already had a long video with 10 plus cards, or 10 cards, so I said, you know, I'll make the extra cards, I'll use up the rest of the pattern paper, and those extra cards are going to be over on my blog. So if you're wondering what I made with the last bits of pattern paper, you can check it out over there. For my next card, after I had layered up the rainbow heart pattern onto some other shapes and used the sprinkles, I wanted to use this striped pattern paper. The kit comes with one piece of Doodlebug paper that has stripes on it, and I didn't want to just use it as a piece of pattern paper. I wanted to cut apart the stripes and do something a little bit different with it. So what I decided to do was to create diagonal stripes with the sending lots of color your way sentiment in the center of them. Luckily for me, most of the stripes were about the size of my ATG gun or a little bit bigger, so I was able to use that nice strong adhesive all the way across. And as you can see, I'm taking the full 6-inch strip and laying it down. Then I'm going to trim off the extra bits. I find that to be infinitely easier. However, I don't want to use a full 6-inch strip towards the top or bottom because obviously it's getting a lot, the opposite of wider, a lot narrower towards the top and bottom, and so I don't want to waste this big long strip. So what I'm going to do is, after I have laid down most of my largest strips, I'm going to pull some of them towards the side such that extra is hanging off one side versus the other. There's only like a tiny bit off one side and then a big long strip off the other. Then I'll turn my paper over, and this is not a card base, but it's just under a card base because it's going to go on top of things. And I'm going to turn it over, trim off all those little paper strips, and then I'm going to pull some of the long paper strips and reuse them to cover the narrow parts at the top and bottom where I only need just a bit. And so you can kind of see that with the orange. I cut it off the top and then used it along the bottom so that I was wasting a little bit less paper and I could use these other strips for different projects. And so I'll do the same thing again here, nice narrow strip from the bottom that I'll pull onto the top. I think though that there is enough different designs from that stripe pattern paper that you wouldn't have to reuse if you would prefer each one to be unique. Then I will trim that up a little bit to kind of smooth out all the edges, and I'm going to again mount it on a black card mat and then onto a standard A2 size card. All the cards I'm creating today are A2 size, which is 4 by 5 1/4. That you get that from taking a standard 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, cutting it in half, and then scoring it in half of that. So all very, very standard. Then I had the last shaker tag. Like I said, there was supposed to be 4 of them, but I only had 3. So I'm going to make my third shaker card here, and the kit only comes with 2 of the shaped shaker pieces, even though it's supposed to have 4 of the tags. I thought that, again, I did think that that was a little bit weird because, you know, like the tags were kind of meant to work with those. But anyway, you can create your own shaker with them, and that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to create my own shaker with the shaped tags by putting some acetate behind the window and then adding some foam tape. I'm going to do something very similar that I did on the first card. However, because I'm going to make my own shaker, I wanted to kind of go through that process a little bit and just share my personal tips for what I like to do with shakers, as I've found some success recently with them. I think the biggest key is to make them thicker than seems comfortable at first. Even though that makes it a little bit more tricky to go through the mail, the thicker it is, the better it shakes. So maybe save shaker cards for those cards that you hand out in person. I double up my foam tape, which is already a thicker foam tape, and then I lay it around. Even if the shape is like a circle, I still lay my foam in a rectangle for the most part, just because it tends to be easier and it just gives the sequins more room to shake about in. This time I am using the Rock Candy sequins from Cat Scrappiness. Cat Scrappiness has really, really beautiful sequin mixes. I'm highly impressed with them, and you get a fair amount. I don't like to have a ton of shaker mix or sequin mix because you have a lot of it and you only make a couple shaker cards with it and then you're good to go. So I like the amount that they give you, but I also like the uniqueness of their mixes because they sometimes have like sequins mixed with beads, mixed with like shaped sequins, such as the sort of hexagons that are in that Rock Candy sequin mix. But I also had used a Mint Owl Studio rainbow sequin mix earlier. So if you were wondering where that rainbow sequin mix is, I will of course try to link most of the things that I worked with in the video description, but if I forgot something or you had a question, always feel free to leave a comment. I do really try to respond to comments as much as possible. So I didn't want to just stick this shaker on a piece of pattern paper because I kind of done that twice already. I did, however, want to play with that happy birthday sentiment because I thought that that was really fun how it went all the way across the strip and you could basically create a card element or pattern with it. So that's what I've decided to do here. As I said, I'm not going to create a lot of birthday cards with this because most of the cards will be donated, but of course, I have people in my life who have birthdays that I need cards for, so I'm going to make a few. I'm again stamping with Distress Oxide ink because you can change the colors easily, as I mentioned before, and because it stamps beautifully. Even this really tiny detailed sentiment here stamps wonderfully with Distress Oxide inks. And that might be surprising to you if you're used to Distress inks, which aren't necessarily recommended as stamping inks. But the Distress Oxides are very different because they have that pigment quality. And I stamped that sentiment directly onto my card base, and I put my shaker on top of it. Now, as I mentioned before, am kind of focused on using certain things up. Obviously, you can't use up the stamp set, so if at the end of the card, at the end of this little card making session, I will still have the stamp set left. But I thought it would be really nice if I did not have any pattern paper or any of the sprinkles left, that I should just kind of use them up all right away. And I know that that's counterintuitive for some people. Some people kind of prefer to, use stuff over time. But I find that I have a lot of pattern paper and I have a lot of enamel shapes and other embellishments, etc., etc. So if I'm going to sit down and make 10 cards with a kit or 10 cards with a product, I may as well use it to the point that it is well used up, because then I'm going to get a lot out of it. I will have 10 cards to show for it. And I won't kind of have that sort of lingering, oh, there's just those 3 more stickers on that pack, but instead they're all used up. So with that in mind, I decided to create a card based off of the 2 cloud stickers from the sprinkle set. However, the cloud sprinkles are pretty small, so I did not think they could be their own focal image, and I decided to mix it with some of the clouds from the card kit. So I'm going to stamp a few clouds and cut them out. In this particular case, I am going to fussy cut them, and then I am going to put some memento marker around the edges so that it sort of fixes up any imperfections in my fussy cutting. I didn't want a white border around them because because the sprinkles don't have a border, so it would be kind of silly if these clouds had a border in my mind. That's what I'm thinking. And I thought, well, I'll put 2 regular clouds, like 2 stamped clouds, and then 1 sprinkle cloud. But in the end, I felt like it still wasn't quite enough. The scene wasn't full. So I am going to go back later and add the second cloud from the sprinkle set, partly to use it up and partly because I wanted to fill the area a little bit more. However, because the cardstock that I'm using to cut those clouds from is so thick, I use the 110-pound Recollections cardstock for most things. When I tried to overlap the sticker, it kind of poked up a bit and wasn't solidly on the paper. So I just cut a little piece of cardstock as essentially a shim and pushed it behind the cloud so that it was even with the dimension from the stamped and cut cloud. Next, I wanted to again use more of those sprinkle stickers because that was part of my goal. However, I was keeping in mind that these cards could possibly go to small children, and I think that the people who are passing out the cards, do take into consideration things like, they could peel something off the card, and it could be a choking hazard. So like these stickers could come off, a child could put them in their mouths, especially because they look like, treats. They're like little ice creams and little cupcakes, so they kind of look like candy. Especially those little dots, because there is like that dot candy that exists in the world. So I thought, well, is there a way that I can make it such that the stickers are on the card but can't be easily peeled off the card? So my idea was to make some windows similar to shakers, cover the windows with plastic, and then put the stickers behind the windows. So I'm putting the stickers directly onto the card base. I put a piece of acetate behind the holes, so even though you can see the stickers very clearly, if you were to go to try to touch the stickers, you would run into the acetate and you wouldn't be able to peel the stickers off the backer. And so I thought that that would make it a little bit more like child safe. Now, in retrospect, I wish that I hadn't glued the acetate down until I placed all my stickers, because if I hadn't put the acetate down, then what I could be doing right now is just placing the stickers through the holes and getting easier placement. Then I could add the acetate later. But, live and learn. So anyway, I am just thinking about where I want to place them, and then I'm lifting up the piece of paper that has the acetate on it, and I'm sticking it down below. And you can see I even used a bit of painter's tape to sort of hold that temporarily in place, and I'll add adhesive later, but by putting it in place, I'm able to lift it up easily without shifting it each time, and I'm able to fill in the stickers. And as you can see, I'm being pretty generous with those sprinkle stickers because, again, as I mentioned, I want to use it up. I'm okay with that. Like, that's kind of the point of buying all this stuff, is to use it to make cute cards. So we don't need to hoard it. And the kiddos will certainly appreciate it. They'll love all the little details. So now I'm ready to adhere all of this down. I'm going to run my ATG because it is really strong, really sticky adhesive, and I know that it will be harder to peel up if that is a concern. I'm also using those circle dies are from Cat Scrappiness. They have a really good set of circle dies at a relatively cheap price. So if you're in the market for like basic circle dies without the stitching or anything like that, they have a great price, but they also have stitched ones and crisscross and like some other different designs. So I'd check them out if you're like interested in basic shapes. I really loved the cloud face images. And I especially loved that the stamp designer, and I think Christina Warner designs the stamps for the card kits, that they chose not to put the faces in the clouds, that instead put them to the side and you could add faces to the clouds so that you had two choices for faces for one, and so that you could use the clouds plain as well. So I thought that was a really smart design, but I liked having the faces on them. So I stamped 4 clouds and I added the faces to them, and these little circles are my leftovers. So when I cut those circles out of that other piece using the Cat Scrappiness dies, I saved them because I knew that they could be embellishment on my next card. And so I'm going to kind of let them guide me because there's 3 of them, and I can, things tend to look good in odds and also in visual triangles. So if you kind of connected those 3 circles, they would create a triangle. And I'm going to stamp my sentiment inside, because it's sort of like the clear place for it to go because it, is inside that visual triangle. And then I'm going to give each one of the circles, each one of the heart circles, their own cloud. And I'm going to mix up the placement of the clouds and use 2 different faces just for a little bit of interest. I've added the pink to the cheeks, and you might be thinking, like, didn't you do that before? Well, the first time I ran those clouds through my scan and cut, I did not adhere it down to my scan and cut mat securely enough, and my scan and cut sort of ate the paper. I was able to fix it, and luckily it wasn't anything that was too detailed. It wasn't like a big image that I had colored and spent a lot of time on, so that was good. But do be wary of, if your scan and cut mat is not sticky enough to hold your items down, I personally use painter's tape to hold it down. I know that that's not recommended by the warranty, so that is an at your own risk. I take no liability for that. That's just what I personally do. For my next card, I wanted to try something clean and simple, and maybe something that would be better for a young boy, because there was so much pink and rainbows and, like really more girly stuff. I wanted to try something different. So there's this big, long strip stamp in the stamp set. And I thought, well, I could stamp it in some fun colors, and I chose the Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink and Salty Ocean ink. And I created just a really simple pattern, basically an X, and I chose 3 of them, and I mixed up where I put the colors, 2 green stripes with 1 blue, and then 2 blue with 1 green, just for a little bit of interest. And I stamped the sentiment on top of it at an angle, again, just like the stripes are at an angle. I added some simple rounded corners, and that was pretty much it. I felt like, it was enough. It still made sense with the sentiment because there was 2 super bright colors. You could, of course, mass produce this, and you could, of course, use your misti so that you don't have imperfections in the stamping. As you can see there, my blue stripe didn't stamp perfectly. And here, I was just briefly showing you what it looked like when my scan and cut sort of ate those clouds. So that's the only time my scan and cut's ever done that to me, and I still love my scan and cut, but I just wanted to mention it because I didn't want to pretend like it was perfect. I'm quickly flipping through all of the cards that I made with the card kit today. There's 10 cards here, but I said, you know, there are 2 bonus cards to use up what is left of the pattern paper over at my blog in case you're interested. So like those pattern paper scraps you see there, I do turn them into other cards, and then I basically just have the cardstock and stamp set left, which I'm okay with because I'll have plenty of reasons to use cardstock and the stamp. But I wanted to just kind of use up the rest of that pattern paper. So you can check it out, and that'll be in the video description as well. I will, of course, link you to all of the supplies that I used and the card kit since it is still available at Simon Says. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that this gave you some good ideas, and if you're interested in more similar videos, if you subscribe to the Hero Arts kits, for instance, please subscribe to my channel so that you can get ideas. I will hopefully be sharing the Hero Arts kit soon as well. Thanks for watching. Bye.